For today's video lesson, I'm going to just be reviewing your simple interest notes and doing some examples with you over simple interest. And so before I jump into some examples, I just want to really quickly remind us that the simple interest formula is I equals PRT, where I stands for my interest, P stands for my principal, R stands for my rate, and T stands for my time in years. There is such a thing as compound interest, but today we're just going to be dealing with simple interest. In fact, this year we're just going to be dealing with simple interest. So there are different situations in life that warrant interest. When you go to the bank and you take out a loan, they charge you a fee for borrowing their money. That's called interest. Anytime you borrow money for different kinds of things, they're going to charge you interest. Then there's also another type of interest that seems to be a little more, it's more of a good thing for us consumers. If you take your money and you put it in a bank, banks will give you interest for keeping your money with them. And so they'll pay you to keep your money in their bank. The more money you have, that's your principal that you put into the bank, the more money you'll get paid. The higher their interest rate, the more you get paid. And the longer time that it's there in the bank, in years, according to the simple interest equation, the more interest you'll earn and get paid. So when we're talking about interest at the bank and you getting the interest, you want that interest number to be high. You want your rate to be high. You want to put as much money in as you can and leave it there for as long as you can. When we're talking about interest that we pay for a house loan, a car loan, any of those big life purchases that we take a loan out for, when we're talking about that kind of interest, the principal is the amount that we borrow. It's the loan amount. And so we want to take out the smallest loan that we need for our purchase. We want our interest rate to be low. So you often hear commercials talk about rates as low as, and they'll give you, because you want that rate to be low. And then your time, you want the time that it takes you to pay that loan back as small as possible so that your interest, all these things multiplied together, is what gives us our interest. The smaller these numbers are, the smaller number it is that we pay in interest, because we really don't want to pay for that extra amount if we don't have to. So we've got interest, principal, rate, and time in years. I equals PRT, and we're going to use that formula to do a couple examples here together. First example says find the missing value, and they want us to know what I is. So I like to always write the formula down first just so that it's drilled into my head. I equals PRT, and then I plug in what I know. I don't know my I, so I'm going to leave it as a variable. My principal is $750. Times my rate is 6%. We always want to write our rate when we're multiplying as a decimal. And so we take a percentage and we make it into a decimal by moving that decimal 2 places to the left. So I have to add a 0 here. My decimal for my rate is 0 6/100. My time in years is 2 years. And then from here, we are allowed to use calculators this unit. And so I multiply all three of those numbers together to get my interest as $90. So in this case, maybe I put my $750 into the bank. The interest rate that I got, which is a really high interest rate for things like this, but my interest rate was 6%. After 2 years, they will have paid me $90 in interest to keep my money at their bank. So I haven't done anything, I haven't worked or done anything except for put my money there and keep it there, and the bank is paying me interest. So now I have another example where our missing value is going to be within the equation. So again, our equation is I equals PRT. And I'm going to be giving you 3 values and asking you always to find one. So in this case, my interest, my I is 1,440. That's what I plug in I for, equals P, which we don't know, so I'm going to leave that as a variable, times R, which is my rate, as a decimal. That rate is 0 4/100ths. And then times my t, which is time in years. In this case, that's 3 years. I'm going to multiply what I can on this side of the equation. 0 4/10ths times 3. And when I do that, I get p times 12/100ths is equal to 1,440. Now I have a one-step equation where I have a variable on this side being multiplied, and I use inverse operations to solve. The inverse of multiplying is dividing, and so I'm going to divide both sides by 0 and 12/100ths. 1,440 divided by 1,440 divided by 12/100ths is $12,000 is equal to my principal. So maybe this was a car loan. The initial amount that they had to borrow was $12,000. If they had a 4% interest rate and they paid that car off in 3 years, their interest would have been $1,440. So they would pay an extra $1,440 for that $12,000 car because they didn't have the money right up front. So these first two, we used the equation I equals PRT to just fill in some missing values, given the other one that was a little more plain language. Now we're going to jump into a word problem where we're going to have to figure out what each of these things is. So our word problem here says find the simple interest for $2,000 invested in a savings account at 5 7/500% for 2 years. When we're talking about simple interest, I'm always going to write my equation I equals PRT. And then I kind of like to have like these little sidebars, I equals, P equals, R equals, and T equals. Find the simple interest. We're not sure what the interest is. The principal is the money that we invested, the money that we put into the savings account. This is our principal. So principal is $2,000. Our rate is 5.75%, and our time in years is 2 years. So now that I've got my variables defined, I've got them with a value, now I can plug them into this equation. We don't know. The P is $2,000 times my rate is, move that decimal 2 places to the left, 0 and 575/10,000ths times 2. Note that I'm not doing any rounding. The directions didn't tell me to round, and so I'm not going to do any rounding with that percentage. I'm going to leave it as 0 and 575/10,000ths. I use my calculator to find out that my interest here would be $230. So if I put $2,000 into a savings account with a high rate of 5 7/500%, if it stays there for 2 years, I don't touch that money, I'm going to make $230 in interest. And so that's what we're finding in these word problems. Again, when we're looking at word problems, I really like to write out the equation and then write out each variable to figure out what I know and what I need to know. And from there, I can solve that equation, whether it be a one-step equation or just a multiplying equation, to figure out the missing value that I need. I'm going to do one more with you, and I actually am going to do this one more with you, and then I'm going to give you a chance to try one by yourself before you move on. It says, if you borrow $3,200 for 30 months at 3.5% interest, and this is interest rate, what is the total amount you will have to repay? So the key word here they've underlined for us in this word problem is total. What they're saying is we're borrowing this much, we're going to pay interest on that, as well as we have to pay back the money that we actually borrowed. So at the end of this, we're going to have one more extra step. But right now, I'm going to write out my equation, I equals PRT, and then I'm going to write out my variables, I, P, R, and T, and I'm going to see what I know. it says that we're going to borrow this amount. If I'm borrowing or putting money into the account, that is my principal. That's the money that we're loaning out, borrowing, putting into an account, that sort of thing. Our rate is 3.5%. Our rate is always a percentage, so when you see the percentage sign, that should clue you in immediately to know, yeah, that's a rate. And then our time says 30 months, and we're always really tempted to want to put 30 months here, but remember that time is always in years, and this is in months. So before I put that months here, I have to figure out how many years 30 months is, and because there are 12 months in a year, 30 divided by 12 is 2.5. So that would mean that this event, 30 months, is 2.5 years. So our time is actually 2.5. It's really important that we always make sure that our time is in years, not months. That's why this one can be a little bit tricky. So I've got the other three values. What I don't know is my interest. So I'm going to figure out what my interest is by plugging the values in. $32,000 times 0 and 35 thousandths times 2.5 years. When I multiply all of that together, 32,000, 35 thousandths, 2 5/10, I get $2,800. At this point, I want you in word problems especially to go back to the question and ask myself, does my answer make sense? And it says, if you borrow $32,000, what is the total amount that you have to repay? There are very few people in the world who will let you borrow $32,000 and only pay back $2,800 of it. The world doesn't work like that. People want what they let you borrow. They also want their interest. Interest is like your fee for borrowing their money. That's the perk of letting people borrow your money. You can charge them a fee for borrowing that money. And so the total amount that we have to repay, we're going to have to pay back principal and interest when we go to pay back that loan or that loan. So I've got $32,000 plus $2,800. That's going to give me my total of $34,000, $34,800. This is the total amount that we'll pay. That answer makes much more sense. If we borrowed $32,000, that we pay back $34,800. So now this very last one says Tucker purchased a $500 savings bond. After 10 years, it's worth $575. Find the simple interest rate for his bond. Remember now total it's worth $575, so you have to figure out what the interest was by thinking about what his total is now and what the principal he put in. But at this point in time, I want you to take a quick second to try this one on your own, pause the video, and then unpause to see if you got it right. So you should be checking your answers with me now. The equation we have is I equals PRT. My interest is 575 minus 500 because this is how much it's worth now. This is what I put in. My interest is the difference between the two. It earned $75 in that 10 years, and so my interest was $75. So be extra careful here. Your interest is $75. Your principal is the amount you put in. That's $500. Your rate, we're not sure. That's what it wants us to find, is your simple interest rate. And then our time is 10 years. And so now I can plug all of that into my equation. I is 75, P is 500, times R, we don't know, and times 10 for our time. On this side of the equation, I can multiply in any order. So 500 times 10 is 5,000 times R. The inverse of multiplying by 5,000 is dividing by 5,000. So I'm going to do that on both sides to get R by itself. 75 divided by 5,000 is 0 and 15 thousandths. Remember that our rates are always written as a percentage, and so we should move that decimal 2 places to the right, and our rate should be 1 5/10%, or 1.5% interest rate. So Tucker got a 1.5 interest rate. After 10 years, his $500 turned into $575 because he earned $75 in interest. So you can see how I use the equation and how I use writing out each of the variables to help me solve for my missing variable, and then at the end always make sure that our answer seems reasonable and makes sense within the context of the problem.